Hi guys, and welcome to Nutrition. My name is Andrea LaFlamme, and I'm going to be your professor for this semester. We're going to start out with Chapter 1 in your text. Should be Visualizing Nutrition, the third edition. We're just going to go right through the whole book, chapter by chapter. So let's go ahead and get started. First, Chapter 1, Nutrition, Everyday Choices. So at the beginning of each chapter, we're going to have some student learning outcomes. This is really great because it gives you an idea of what sorts of things we're going to be talking about in each lecture. And it's also good because when we're done with the lecture, it'll give you something to go back to just to double check and make sure that you understand all of the concepts for each chapter. So at the end of today, you should be able to reflect on factors that influence food choices, compare and contrast the 6 nutrient classes, describe ways to obtain balance, variety, and moderation to avoid under and overnutrition, describe how genes and diet interact to promote health and result in disease, and finally evaluate nutrition information and claims. So as we go through these slides, you'll notice some terms in red. The terms that are outlined in red are key definitions that are really important for you to learn. You'll probably see them at some point on an exam, and it's really important to understand and make note of these key terms. So just a little hint for you to make note of them. So first we're going to talk about nutrients. Now, nutrients, as you'll see later on in this chapter, encompasses almost everything that we're going to talk about in nutrition. So nutrients serve 3 main functions. The first is that they provide energy. Now we measure this energy in calories. I'm imagining that most all of you have seen calories on a nutrition facts label or heard about calories, but what you might not have known is that calories are actually a measure of energy. And we'll talk about this more later on this chapter. The second function of nutrients is that they provide structure for your body, and third, they regulate body processes. So nutrients can be divided into 2 categories, essential nutrients and non-essential nutrients. Essential nutrients are those that our body can not make. So it's essential that we consume them in our diets. Non-essential nutrients can be made within our bodies. So we don't have to get non-essential nutrients from our food, though they do still exist in food and we can get them. It's not necessary. Nutrient density. So in science classes in high school or maybe another college class, you've probably heard about density. When we're talking about food, we're going to be talking about nutrient density. So foods that are high nutrient dense are those that contain more nutrients per calorie. Examples of those include vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. Low nutrient dense foods are those that contain fewer nutrients per calorie, and examples of those include cake, sugary drinks, and French fries. All right, this graph is comparing 2 different beverages and giving you an idea of what a nutrient-dense food or beverage source looks like when compared to one with lower nutrient density. So in this example, we're comparing a cup of low-fat milk to a cup of sweetened iced tea. Now, as you can see in this graph, both of them contain about 100 calories. Within the sweetened iced tea, though, you get 100 calories, but no calcium, no vitamin D, and no vitamin A, right? So we would say that that's a low nutrient dense food. Whereas low-fat milk, for the same number of calories, about 100, you have a whole bunch of calcium, vitamin D, and vitamin A. So for the same amount of calories, you're getting a lot more nutrients, sort of more bang for your buck. And that's why we would think of low-fat milk as a high nutrient-dense food. Now this slide shows 3 examples of foods and in a low nutrient dense state and in a higher nutrient dense state. So just some comparisons. The top one shows chicken nuggets on the left, and on the right we have a skinless chicken breast. So the chicken nuggets, there's more than 5 in the picture, but a serving of 5 chicken nuggets would contain about 230 calories and 12 grams of protein. Now, in comparison, the skinless chicken breast, the more high nutrient dense option, only contains 162 calories and 25 grams of protein. So you'll see there the chicken breast contains far fewer calories and more than double the protein as the chicken nuggets. In the second example, we have French fries as the low nutrient dense option and a baked potato as the high nutrient dense option. Now the French fries, the example that they used is about a medium order of fries, contain about 380 calories and 9 milligrams of vitamin C. Compare that to a more high nutrient dense option like a medium baked potato. So you'll notice the potato in this picture, the baked potato we're talking about, doesn't have a bunch of sour cream and butter and bacon and all of that. It's just a baked potato. And it's going to contain about 160 calories and a whopping 17 milligrams of vitamin C. So the medium baked potato compared to the French fry has less than half the calories and nearly double the amount of vitamin C as the French fries, making the baked potato the more nutrient-dense option. In the last example given here, we have a slice of apple pie, which contains about 411 calories and 4 grams of fiber. Now, the example on the right is just a medium apple, but there's 2 apples there, so we're going to talk about 2 apples. And at 95 calories apiece, 2 apples would contain about 190 calories and 4 grams of fiber. So in this example, we have 5 grams of fiber in the apple pie compared to 4 grams of fiber in the apple. But in the apple pie, you have 411 calories compared to the 190 in the apple. All right, now we're going to move on to the difference between fortified foods and enriched foods. Fortified foods are those that have nutrients added to them that were not originally present. Enriched foods are those that add back nutrients that were lost during processing. The Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, requires fortification and enrichment of some foods in an attempt to prevent disease. One example is shown in the picture on the right. Iodized salt is an example of a fortified food. Iodine isn't normally present in salt. If you were to go to the store and buy sea salt, you would see that it doesn't have any iodine in it. So how'd the iodine get there? Well, many years ago in the United States, there was a high incidence of iodine deficiency. So researchers looked at what were some common foods that people ate. Salt turned out to be one of them. And they decided to add iodine to salt because it was something that people consumed frequently. And knowing that the iodine wouldn't change the chemical composition of the salt, wouldn't change the way it cooked, wouldn't change the way it tasted. So basically people could just continue using salt in their everyday recipes and foods. But now the only difference is they'd be getting the iodine that they needed and fewer people would be suffering from iodine deficiency. So again, iodized salt, that iodine was is considered a fortification because the iodine isn't normally present in salt, and that actually is an addition that is required by the Food and Drug Administration. Now, an example of enriched foods, you may have seen like enriched white bread or other grain products. When grains in particular are processed to make a food like bread, during that processing, a lot of the vitamins and minerals are stripped from that grain during processing. And so the enrichment process adds back those vitamins and minerals that were originally present in the grain back into the finished bread product, right? And this is an example of companies voluntarily adding nutrients. It's not something that they have to do, but many do it. Another good example is in breakfast cereal. A lot of breakfast cereal companies, if you look at the front of the box, they'll advertise all these different vitamins and other nutrients that are present in the cereal. Those are things that were added after the fact. So especially children's cereals, you look at a lot of sugary, colorful children's cereals, they normally wouldn't have very many nutrients in them at all. But the cereal manufacturers will add in those vitamins and minerals after the fact and advertise them on the front of their boxes as a way of enticing people to buy their product. All right, next we're going to talk about phytochemicals and zoochemicals. So these are non-nutrient substances in food thought to be beneficial to the human body. Phytochemicals are foods found in plants. We have that prefix phyto referring to plants. And zoochemicals are in foods from animals, zoo referring to animals. So this slide shows some examples of phytochemicals in fruits and vegetables. In the top left, we have garlic, broccoli, and onions, and they provide sulfur-containing phytochemicals that help protect us from some forms of cancer by inactivating carcinogens or stimulating the body's natural defenses. On the bottom left, yellow-orange fruits and vegetables such as peaches, apricots, carrots, and cantaloupe, as well as leafy greens, are rich in carotenoids, which are phytochemicals that may prevent oxygen from damaging our cells. In the upper right, we have soybeans, and these are a source of phytoestrogens, which are hormone-like compounds found in plants that may reduce the risk of certain types of cancer and cause small reductions in blood cholesterol. And finally, we have purple grapes, berries, and onions that provide red, purple, and pale yellow pigments called flavonoids, which prevent oxygen damage and may reduce the risk of cancer and heart disease. All right, now this slide may look a little chaotic, but I think it's a pretty helpful tool for helping you to understand the different classifications of nutrients. I would actually encourage you to take out a piece of paper and draw an example of this yourself to fill in, just so that it'll help you commit it to memory. So at the top we have nutrients. We define that at the very beginning of this chapter, and that's divided into two categories. We have macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are nutrients that we need larger amounts of, whereas micronutrients we need in much smaller amounts. But that doesn't make them any less important. So we have 4 macronutrients: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, which is another word for fats, and water. Now, of these 4, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids contain calories, whereas water doesn't. Now, you might not really think of water as a nutrient, but it definitely is, and it's really, really important to have in your diet. On the right are micronutrients, are vitamins and minerals, and you'll notice if you look ahead in your book, these 6 classes of nutrients: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, water, vitamins, and minerals, we will talk about in length later on in this course. In this slide, it's not anything that you need to memorize, but it's just giving you a few examples of nutrients in each of the 6 classes. So for carbohydrates, we have starch, sugar, and fiber. Under lipids and fats, we have saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, and cholesterol. Under vitamins, we have A, D, E, K, C, B12, folic acid, and niacin. And under minerals, we have sodium, calcium, and fluoride. All right, so a quick concept check for where we are so far. Which of the following does not contain any calories? A, vitamins, B, fats, C, carbohydrates, or D, proteins? All right, the correct answer here is A, vitamins do not contain calories. All right, next question. Cholesterol is an example of A, vitamin, B, fat, C, carbohydrate, or D, protein. All right, the answer is B, fat. All right, one last question before we move on. Starch is an example of a vitamin, B, fat, C, carbohydrate, or D, protein. All right, C, carbohydrate is the correct answer. All right, now we're going to move on and talk about nutrient functions. So nutrients work to provide energy in the form of calories, provide building blocks for structures. You remember that from one of the first slides. And some examples of those are bones, hair, and skin. Also cell membranes and structures. And the third function is regulating body processes, and this includes body temperature, blood pressure, hormones and cell communication, and speeding up cellular reactions. All right, this is just kind of leading us in more about nutrient functions, but you'll notice the body composition of a lean adult male in that picture at the center. A female body consumption is going to look a little different. You should be able to find that in your text. But the average lean adult male is made up of 6% minerals, carbohydrates, and other substances, 16% fat, 16% protein, and 62% water. So calorie with a capital C. All right, this might be a little tricky to understand, but I'm going to do my best, and if you have any questions later, feel free to reach out, and I'll try to help you. Okay, so calorie with a capital C equals a kilocalorie, which is actually 1,000 calories with a small c. All right, so what does this mean? So a calorie with a capital C is a measurement of the amount of energy that it takes to raise a specific volume of water by 1 degree. All right, so that's really not important for you to know as a nutritionist. It's a science topic that you would probably need to know if you were in engineering or another discipline. But if you have heard of a calorie before in that capacity, it's important to know that the calories that we're talking about with regard to food are actually kilocalories. Excuse me. and they actually equal 1/1000th of a calorie that you would hear about with regard to engineering or another science discipline. We're still going to call them calories. The only difference that you would see if you saw them both discussed in the same place is that calories with regard to food has a little c, lowercase c, and calories as it's discussed in engineering and other fields has a capital C. So we still use it in nutrition to talk about the amount of energy that a food provides. So protein and carbohydrates each contain 4 calories per gram. So if you had a gram of protein and a gram of carbohydrates, both are going to contain 4 calories. Now, fat has 9 calories per gram. So in that same amount, in a gram of fat, you're going to have 9 calories, so more than double the number of calories in a single gram of protein or carbohydrates. Now, alcohol isn't a nutrient, right? You didn't see it back on that table with the 6 classes of nutrients, but we are going to talk about it a little bit in this chapter and then later on this semester because it does provide 7 calories per gram. So again, a gram of alcohol is going to have almost twice as many calories as a gram of proteins and carbohydrates. All right, now we're going to chat about malnutrition. So when you hear the word malnutrition, you probably think about undernutrition, but overnutrition is also an example of malnutrition. So some definitions here. Overnutrition is too much of a single nutrient or nutrients or calories, whereas undernutrition is too little of a particular nutrient or nutrients or calories. So the picture on the left is an example of a healthy, well-nourished child, whereas the example on the right is an example of a child that would be considered undernourished. And then the child in this photograph, this boy, is an example of somebody who would be considered overnourished. So perhaps has more of a particular nutrient or consumes more calories than his body actually needs. Overnutrition. So based on this graph on the right hand side of the slide, the graph shows leading causes of death in the United States. Excuse me. About what percentage of all deaths are due to nutrition-related diseases? Now again, you can see the nutrition-related diseases are in blue. So is it 5%, 10%, 50%, or 90%? All right, the answer is C, 50%. And you can get that by looking at the height of each of the blue bars and their corresponding percentages and adding them together. We're going to go with approximately 50%. All right, now we're going to move on to talk a little bit about genetics. DNA is in the nucleus of each cell. In humans, there are 46 long strands of DNA. Each DNA strand is condensed and packaged into what we call a chromosome, and each chromosome contains many shorter genes. Excuse me. Each gene is the instructions to make one protein, and there are anywhere from 20,000 to 30,000 genes in the human body. So what does this have to do with you? Well, with human inheritance, you have 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each egg or sperm has 1/2 of each chromosome pair or 23 total chromosomes. During fertilization, an egg and sperm fuse together, resulting in an embryo that has 46 chromosomes, 23 from its father and 23 from its mother. So why are we talking about this with regard to nutrition? Well, some diseases occur when one gene is mutated, things like cystic fibrosis and sickle cell anemia, but most diseases result from both genetics and the environment where genes increase risk, such as obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. Now, people can be predisposed to some of these diseases based on their genetic history, but also in some cases, folks can just develop these diseases based on their behavior alone. So this graph is showing the two aspects of your life that result in disease risk. So your actual risk of disease results from the interplay between the genes you inherit and the diet and lifestyle choices you make. So on the left, we have genes. Your genes may give you a greater or lesser tendency to develop conditions like obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, or diabetes. Then on the right, we have diet and lifestyle. The nutrients and food components you consume and the amount of exercise you get can increase or decrease your risk of developing nutrition-related diseases. Now, one thing that's been in the news a lot lately, and we will continue to read more and more about it, is nutritional genetics or nutrigenomics. So this is the study of interactions between genes and nutrition, and it can result in personalized nutrition, which are diets based on a person's genetic makeup. So what constitutes a healthy diet? A healthy diet should have variety, balance, and moderation. It should be high in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, moderate in calories, sodium, and sugar, and low in unhealthy fats such as trans fats, saturated fats, and cholesterol. Variety. What do we mean when we say variety? Variety means eating foods from a variety of food groups. So fruits, vegetables, meats, grains, but also eating a variety of foods within each food group. So when you're eating fruits, don't just eat apples all the time. Eat apples and oranges and berries and all kinds of different fruits. So the benefit to variety in your diet include increased nutrients and phytochemicals and decreased toxins. So let's say, for example, you're eating a fish that's really high in mercury. If you just eat that fish, that one fish, all the time, then your body's going to build up really high levels of mercury. If you just have the fish once in a while and mix in other forms of protein, you're going to have much lower levels of the mercury toxin in your body. All right, the second key component of a healthy diet is balance. When we talk about balance, we're talking about balancing unhealthy choices with healthy ones, balancing calories in with calories burned, and this is something we'll talk about in a lot more detail in a later chapter, and also balancing foods within food groups. Now, the benefits of balance include a wider variety of nutrients and better weight control. And the third component of a healthy diet is moderation. When we talk about moderation, we're talking about it with regard to moderate portion sizes and moderate consumption of each food. And the benefits to this include not too much of any one nutrient or too many calories. So here are some different examples of how to make healthy choices in your life. So on the upper left, if you have a Big Mac for lunch, instead of a smaller plain burger, you will have to increase your energy expenditure by 300 calories. So, excuse me, 300 calories is the difference between just a small regular cheeseburger and a Big Mac. So one of those is a, not healthy, but healthier choice than the other. And in order to maintain the same weight, you would have to increase your exercise by 300 calories to burn off the additional calories in the Big Mac. You could burn off that additional 300 calories by playing golf for about an hour while carrying your own clubs. Okay, so that kind of just makes you think, okay, if I'm going to go for the Big Mac instead of the regular smaller hamburger, do I want that so badly that I would be willing to play golf for an hour while carrying my own clubs to offset those calories? The example on the bottom, if you have a grande mocha frappuccino on the left with whipped cream and the whole shebang, instead of a regular iced coffee, you would have to increase your energy expenditure by 370 calories. So that's the 370 calories is the difference between a regular iced coffee and a mocha frappuccino of the same size. Now, how would you burn off that 370 calories? Well, you could do it by jogging for about a half an hour. So, again, that's something you can kind of think about if you're comparing calories in different foods and thinking, okay, should I order this drink that has a lot more calories? Am I going to be physically active? Is that going to be something I'm going to burn off, or are those extra calories going to be stored as fat? And you probably have noticed in recent years a lot more restaurants and other places that serve food have been displaying calorie counts next to their menu items. And I think it's really important because certainly, it's your choice what foods you want to eat, but it does provide you with information to make an informed decision. So if you're somebody that's trying to eat fewer calories, you have that information to make a decision. If you're trying to eat more calories, then you have that information so you can make a decision. But just some food for thought when we think about differing calorie levels in foods. All right, now we're going to talk about healthy diets and recommendations and how they're based on research. So we're going to talk about how studies are conducted and how do we know which information to believe and which advice to follow. Obviously, there's tons of information out there, especially on the internet, with regard to nutrition. So we're going to talk about how can you, as somebody reading that information and as a consumer, how do you know what to believe? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the science of nutrition in the scientific method. So if you've taken like a biology class or a chemistry class, you've probably heard about the scientific method. Well, researchers use the scientific method all the time to study nutrition too. So there are 7 steps here for the scientific method. First, make an observation. 2, propose a hypothesis. 3, design and conduct an experiment to test the hypothesis. 4, analyze the results. 5, publish and present with peer review. So what peer review means is if you are a dietitian or a food scientist and you've done this study, then in order to have it published by like a scientific journal, you have to go through what's called peer review. And peer review means other professionals in your field, so other food scientists or other dietitians, have to review the work that you did, review the study that you conducted to make sure that the outcomes are true and that you followed all the proper steps. Step 6 of the scientific method is to repeat and expand experiments. If somebody conducts an experiment and gets a result one time, that's great. but it's just one time. So if experiments can be repeated multiple times and keep getting the same results, then that gives a better indication that those results are in fact true. And then step 7 is developing theories based on results from after many experiments have been done. So once an experiment has been completed over and over and replicated by multiple people, then a theory can be developed that kind of states what the outcome is as fact. So here is an example of the scientific method with regard to nutrition. So the first step is to make an observation. So in this example, the observation is that more people get colon cancer in the United States than in Japan, right? This is pretty easy to tell, something you can find by just looking at population statistics. It's a fact. More people get colon cancer in the US than in Japan. Okay, so step 2 would be to propose an explanation for this observation. And that's what's called a hypothesis. So you would be making a guess as to why the incidence of colon cancer is higher here than in Japan. So in this example, their hypothesis is that the lower incidence of colon cancer in Japan is due to dietary differences. All right, so they have this hypothesis. Now the third step is to conduct an experiment to see if that hypothesis is true. So in this example, they compared the incidence of colon cancer of Japanese people who moved to the United States, and then after moving, consumed a typical U.S. diet with Caucasian Americans who eat the same diet. Now, the results of that experiment showed that the Japanese people who ate the U.S. diet have the same higher incidence of colon cancer as Caucasian Americans. So the experiment, in this instance, finds the hypothesis to be true, that colon cancer can be linked to diet. Now, if the results from repeated experiments support this hypothesis, a scientific theory can then be developed. So, if this happens one time, then, cool, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. There could have been an error in the research, or some other, issue with their research. So the more times that you're able to get that result, the less likely it is that there was an error. Now, if that outcome is found with repeated experimentation, the theory in this example would be that the U.S. diet contributes to the development of colon cancer. Now we're going to talk about different types of studies. The first, epidemiological studies, study populations. So an example of this would be looking at the correlation between fatty fish consumption and heart disease in Alaskan natives. So in this instance, the population being studied would be Alaskan natives. The second type of study is a laboratory study. It's conducted on cells, animals, or humans, but is conducted completely within a laboratory. So an example of this would be if an individual in a lab ate a meal and was then tested for blood glucose. And the third example is an experimental or clinical study, which compares an experimental or treatment group with a control group. So the example here would be that a treatment group drinks a supplement, whereas the control group drinks what they think is the same supplement, but they're actually taking a placebo. And then the researchers would look at the two groups and compare the outcomes of those who took the supplement with those who took the placebo. All right, nutrition in the news, some things that have been in the news for quite some time and probably won't be going anywhere soon. School lunches and bans at school, so banning certain foods, or some schools ban vending machines or soda. Another item that's often in the news is taxing soda and other sugar-sweetened beverages. Lawsuits against fast food companies, and insurance costs that are based on obesity. So questions to ask when you read some nutrition information in the news or read a study. First question is, does it seem too good to be true? If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Who's the person providing the information? Do they have something to gain? And who performed the study? Third-party studies are certainly a lot more reliable. Say for instance, if Pepsi conducted a study of their soda, and that study showed that Pepsi is actually good for you, you have to think, okay, does that sound too good to be true? Yeah, probably. And who's the person providing the information? Well, Pepsi. So, of course, they're going to say that their product is good for you because they have something to gain, right? It's in their best interest for people to purchase their product. So it's always really important to see who's the person that's giving the message and do they have something to gain. And last, are there other studies that support this information? So again, we're talking about replication, duplication of a study. If the outcome is something that's seen multiple times across multiple experiments, then there's a pretty good chance that it's true. If only one study is saying it, then it might be the result of, a simple error or a fluke somewhere along in the experiment. All right, that is our last slide for the first chapter. Hopefully it wasn't too painful. I know we covered a lot of things, but the first chapter really serves as just an introduction. We will be going into all of these concepts in a lot more detail in later chapters. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed your first lecture. I look forward to meeting you all in lab. And in the meantime, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.